Thank you, Mr. Johan, for accepting our invitation to be here at this program. We would like to get your insight and information and share and experience about you've been working in Vietnam in over the past 3 years in hospitality sectors.
Over the last 3 years when I've been here in Vietnam, I have experienced 5 things when I'm looking at the workforce. First, being passive. Second, sentimental. 3, really lack of taking accountability. A blaming game. And compliance. So if we start with being sentimental, the Vietnamese culture in general, people like to hang out in crowds, they like to talk, they like to socialize. And with socializing in a people-centric industry, people of course like to talk about other departments, talk about other people at work, which often result in conflict because somebody will say something that upsets somebody else. And when that person gets upset, the people that are close to that person gets upset. So now you start getting different camps in the workforce, which is really counterproductive because it's breaking down the teamwork that hospitality is really built on. So how do you get around that? It's a little bit difficult because it's in the people's genes because of the culture. So you have to try to understand how it works and who works with who. And then you really need to set up special teams where you actually take people from the different cliques and mix them in so that they are forced to work with people that they're not normally hanging out with. And by doing that, you slowly start breaking down these barriers that are naturally formed from the social norms that exist at the workplace. Now, when you talk about passiveness, people in general are very laid back in the approach, and which is okay in the hospitality industry because you really don't want to force our customers something other than what they want. So a lot of times in hospitality it's actually good to sit back and understand what the customer wants before they really know what they want. But what happens is you have to tell the staff to do it once, you have to tell the staff to do it twice, you have to tell the staff to do it 3 times. But what I've learned in this culture too is that we go back to the compliance. If you make a checklist and you train the people on the checklist, then it happens. But if it's more verbal and coaching as you go along, it doesn't stick. They will do it 1 or 2 times, but not in the long term and being consistent. So the best way to interact with the staff when it comes with routine work and things that you want them to do on a consistent basis is really to do a thorough checklist and then train the staff on the checklist, because once they're trained on the checklist, they will follow it all the time. Now, accountability. A lot of times, there's 2 things that come hand in hand here. Accountability and the blaming game. This is where the rules and regulations that are formed in many companies here actually has some severe punishment if people don't follow the rules. So by nature, people will become very defensive and protect themselves or protect their friends. So again, this goes back to the sentimental game where people are protecting each other, and now we go back to the cliques. So how do you really address this? Again, when you break the cliques down and you have them work in different groups, now with the checklist, now they are compliant to the checklist, so less chance of error. But now, who do you make accountable for the checklist? That's where each shift and each pre-shift is very important to continuously talk about the checklist and why it's important. Because the worst part that can happen to the checklist, that is just a piece of paper people, oh, I did. That's really not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a living checklist that the supervisor, when he addresses the shift, reminds them at least 2 or 3 or 4 points on the checklist every day, so that it becomes a living document, and then suddenly it becomes their habit. And then once it's their habit, it will happen automatically, and you only have to spot check. This is why it takes a lot of time to really set up the process of the checklist, and then to let the team understand that they are accountable to the checklist as a whole, not necessarily one individual. And this also will break down the blaming game between people, but also between departments. Now we're going to talk about the compliance. In the rest of the world, we often talk about empowerment and allowing the worker or the one facing the customer to make a decision. And the problem is, in the Vietnamese language, there is no word for empowerment. So it's really a concept that's not familiar. So when you then add the compliance to it, it's hard to make a person at the front to make a decision because they haven't been allowed to. So even if you go all the way back to the 80s, you had John Carlson wrote a book that's called The Moment of Truth. He really turned the pyramid upside down and put all the decision power in the customer-facing positions, which lowered the amount of dissatisfied customers, but more importantly, lowered the amount of money that the service industry paid out. In general, here in Vietnam, when we talk about quality, the quality department is called quality control, where in other regions of the world is called quality assurance. So what's really the difference? The difference is quality control is there to find out the problem and who was at fault and make them compliant. That's really what quality control is here in Vietnam in the hotel industry. When you look at quality assurance is about finding out what process went wrong, how it went wrong, and then go back to the department or to the GM and give them solutions about how we correct the process so that the problem doesn't reoccur. So the two different ways of looking at it: quality control is understanding the problem and then automatically assess who was at fault and then take care of who was at fault. Where quality assurance will look at what went wrong in the process, what can we learn from the mistake so that it doesn't reoccur again, and then educate the staff on the process. So that's really two fundamental differences when it comes to compliance, is that understanding what went wrong and then fix it and let people learn from the mistake, or you find the mistake and you issue a warning to the person that made the mistake. Now, which one is going to reoccur? The one where you only issue a warning to the person that broke the rule or made a mistake. The rest of the team doesn't know. Where if you fix the process and let everybody learn from the problem, now you actually addressed a big audience, which means that it won't reoccur again.